folks here who know an awful lot about this, some who have been directly involved as candidates for office. I want to acknowledge somebody, Michael Benjamin. We're honored to have him here with us today. And Michael, let me ask you to speak for a few minutes, if you would, commenting on Jerry's practical questions about whether the approach that you outlined ultimately makes a difference, and anything else that you want to say. And then I'll ask Jerry to respond briefly, and then we will go to the others here.
In the interest of getting to the questions, I'll be short and blunt. I think we know how the presidential system works and how it will work in states. One candidate participated this year and one didn't. The one who participated spent all of his time, a substantial amount of his time, raising money in $85,000 chunks for political parties to spend in independent expenditures on his behalf. The other candidate looked at the system and said, I'm going to be outspent by Hillary Clinton or by whoever another Republican candidate might be, and chose not to participate. The fact is that the flat grant system worked for a couple of decades, and I can't imagine people doing it again. John Kerry's advisors practically tore their hair out when their candidates sat willing to let other people run an independent campaign instead of raising money on its own. The truth is that independent campaigns candidates fear them, even when they're on their own side. They want to be able to match it, and so they're not going to let themselves get locked in to a flat spending limit. We all thought we could figure out what a good spending limit would be a couple of years ago, and then lo and behold, that was a starting point for the last election instead of the amount people spent. So I think the next step after the systems designed in the 1970s were the ones designed in the 1990s, which took care of this problem by saying if your opponent doesn't participate, we'll give you a bonus. We'll give you a trigger. Those are the systems in Arizona and Connecticut. Again, they seem to work pretty well for a while. They had high participation. In the last year, the Arizona trigger system was declared unconstitutional by a certain court. The Connecticut was declared unconstitutional. The Maine was upheld. Conflict between circuits. The Supreme Court put it on its docket yesterday, or this week, last week rather. I expect it to be held unconstitutional. I could be wrong. In Arizona, when they had to go through an election without the trigger mechanism, the participation rate by candidates dropped way down. They looked at it and they said they're scared. They don't want to do that. So the truth is that the flat grant system can only limit spending by candidates who choose to participate. They do nothing to spending outside the system. Does nothing to independent expenditures, and therefore does very little to change the overall mix of people. Now, what does a small donor matching system do? When candidates look at the reality and they say, okay, I'm going to have to raise money, what this says is, yeah, go ahead, but you need to change the way you go about structuring your fundraising mechanisms. You need to start going out and shaking hands and meeting with small donors or setting up kinds of networks of doing it. And then you get rewarded for that. If you don't want to do it, fine. But if you do, you get rewarded, and it turns out from the surveys we've done that the candidates who do it, A, not only get different kind of people in the system, but B, they turn those people into volunteers, and they wouldn't reach out to those people without that incentive. Might people find the candidates otherwise? Yeah, they might. But the whole point about what we know about from the whole, not just the literature of participation, but we know from this is that people respond to being asked. That means the asker has to have the incentive. That means you've got to work on the candidate's incentives. That's what this kind of a system does. Does it do everything you wish? Does it totally turn neighborhoods of people who don't move 15% participation voting rates into civic activists? No. But is it demonstrated as a start that does have an impact? Yes, it does. And very little else that we've tried has that kind of impact.
Jerry?
You know, the only thing I'll say is that if I were a candidate, I'd much rather have house parties where I'm addressing the issues and trying to get people involved in my campaign based upon my ideas, some of which might be unconventional, some of which may be conventional. But that's how people get involved in campaigns. And if I'm a voter, I'd much rather be invited to a house party where the candidate is not asking me even for a few bucks, but the candidate is asking me to get involved because we have the same ideas about housing, we have the same ideas about health care, and so on.
Let me ask one quick question before I look to others for questions or comments. Both of you want to spend a fairly significant amount of tax dollars on this. Michael, I think you had a figure of $34 million. Jerry, you didn't suggest a specific total, but I gather you said $5 million to Blair for when he's running for governor.
Well, he doesn't need so much.
Presumably at least one opponent would get the same. I don't know whether you would include other offices. So double figure millions of dollars. A lot of people don't want their tax dollars spent this way. People are not as interested in contributing to the presidential system as they once were.
Right.
What do you say to those folks?
First of all, they have a point. Why should we be spending our tax dollars on so-called clean campaigns? Well, the reason we should is because it's important in our democracy that the way we structure our elections, the way we elect people, that really matters. And it's a cost. It's a cost of running a government and a political system to do it that way. And it's not that big of a cost, but it's still a cost, and you have to acknowledge that. The reason I constructed the grant program the way I did, of having a candidate raise money and then give it back to a fund and having tax credits to the fund, is because that reduces the amount of actual tax dollars being used. But you have to acknowledge, yes, we are committed, we the government, we are committed to spending some of our money on making sure elections are run cleanly, are run inclusively, and so on.
Yeah, I haven't costed out what a money system would be. It might have been costed out by some advocates before. I'm pretty sure it'd be more than 34 million. But whatever. That's the basic opposition you get to public funding, besides taxpayer opposition to any spending on anything that's not directly coming back. The basic opposition you get is the phrase welfare for politicians. Why should we give the money to you to make it easier for you not to go out there? And I don't think you can answer that very effectively with in a flat grant. But a matching fund system is not that. A matching fund system is money that not only can be defined as, but is money that is, you say that nothing happens except the donor triggers it. And it is a multiplier for a donor, and it is not a welfare for politicians. No political figure gets anything without asking somebody to kick in a nickel of his or her own. I think that's a big advantage.
Very good. Comments, questions?
I'm Betsy Swan with the League of Women Voters. I'd like to ask both of you if you have looked at international systems of financing campaigns, and if you could speak.
Yeah, yes, but they're not easily applied because not too many systems have candidate-centered elections. So many countries have party financing, public parties. They also have free airtime for parties and candidates. And free airtime could be applied more readily here.
Yeah, that's what I have found as well. It just doesn't translate.
What about trying to build up the political parties? Michael, you had, I think, 1% of spending in the council races were from the parties. Isn't it a problem that the parties have become weaker, and
Yes.
should that be reflected in where we do about campaign finance?
The parties in New York City do not do much independent expenditure. They probably, I don't know this for a fact, I don't live in the city anymore. They do grassroots organizing. But on the federal level, political party independent expenditures are very significant.
I'm sorry.
Are very significant. They're high. They represent a significant piece of total campaign spending, and they're concentrated on the most competitive races. So the independent spending by the parties, and now this year by the outside groups, often is equal to the candidates' spending. I think there's an argument to be made for some limited amount of small donor matching to the parties as well. There's an even easier fix, or a thing to do for the parties. Parties don't like independent spending, and we have recommended that they be allowed to do unlimited coordinated spending. They can actually work with their candidates. Why not? I mean, after all, this is the candidate of the party. But the unlimited coordinated spending up to the amount you raise from small contributions.
The reason political parties don't spend as much money in New York City as they do in the state in national elections is because the parties' expenditures are not seen as independent, and therefore they're seen as contributions to the candidates. So it actually hampers the candidate in his or her how they make decisions to spend their campaign dollars if the party is spending money, because that counts against their expenditure limit.
David?
David Schaefer, the Rockefeller Institute. I'd like to maybe ruminate a minute and ask both of you to respond to an observation. Michael, your numbers work from a base of reality that your program might change. That is to say, what are the numbers if the candidates are the same as they were 2009, 2005, whatever you look at. And to me, the interesting question really is, what is a system that will lure people into running? And the system we have now is one where if you get a big non-party group behind you, let's say SEIU, you're in. And if the other candidate already has that, you're less likely to run. Jerry's proposed system relies on the thing that gets you in is $5,500 contributors. Your system relies on the thing that gets you in is lots of smaller contributors. I looked at Jerry's and I'm thinking to myself, who could organize $5,500 contributors? The thing that came to mind instantly was the trial bar, and then I was fascinated to hear that the Association of the Bar of the City of New York likes this idea.
Very different than trial lawyers.
Surprise. Well, but that, some group, a professional, an affluent professional group, strikes me, doctors, whatever, wouldn't be bricklayers, would be the people who would get you in the race under those circumstances. So I kind of like to hear from either of you. What is it that if you're looking at a system that changes behavior before someone is a candidate, what is it that gets them to be a candidate? Which one would work better in that sense?
Well, for any candidate, for any potential candidate, one of the first questions, as an election lawyer, one of the first questions I ask someone who comes into my office, literally whether they're running for President of the United States or for a local assembly person, is, are you prepared to lose? Because it's not easy running for office. And most people lose. The next question, of course, is how are you going to raise the money? How are you going to organize? how are you going to become viable? So whatever system you have, the viability of a candidacy has to be thought about. And some people can organize through consumer groups. Some people can organize because they have the unions. Some people might have the Working Families Party. Some people might have maybe the anointed candidate of either the Democrats or the Republicans. Usually, in order to become a viable candidate, you have to have somebody. Of course, there are examples of candidates who don't have organized support, what we normally characterize as organized support. But they have a message, and they're willing to do the work, and they have a wide circle of people who are not part of the usual suspects, and they go out and organize. It's always an issue. Whatever campaign finance regulatory system we have, that's an issue that faces every candidate. So the question you're asking is, well, is there one that's more conducive of bringing a candidate into office? I'm not sure I know the answer to that. And as far as I'm concerned, in any kind of system, you have that as an issue, and people will be able to use the system or get defeated by the system because he or she's not able to put together an operation. So that's a longer than necessary way of saying is, I don't know that it really matters.
I think it does. Actually, if I were to try to come up with a system that would get most people to use it. Nobody has this. It would be a low threshold flat grant. That would get everybody out of the woodwork to run. Since all existing flat grants are put together by people who know that will cost a fortune, they work on various kinds of thresholds, which is what Jerry was doing, to set the bar higher and make it a little tougher. And where you set the threshold will influence what kinds of networks of people can get folks involved. There's we do know that matching fund systems do also stimulate people to run who have different kinds of constituencies than otherwise would run. A system that hasn't been mentioned, that really ought to be mentioned, that is the major congressional public financing and presidential public financing bill now, and one that will be introduced in Connecticut as a result of the court decision and likely to be considered in other states, is what's called a hybrid system. Flat grants do well at helping people early. Their problem, one of their two problems, is that they have these spending limits. So a lot of places now are thinking about starting off with flat grants and then switching to a match. And that, I think, probably does well at the candidate recruitment stage, depending on the threshold issue. If you set the threshold high, I think you keep people out who probably ought not to be kept out. And matching funds don't have that problem. Matching fund, you don't get money unless you earn it. But what they all have in common, and this is on the national level, common cause and public citizen and public campaign, all ones that were in favor of full flat grants until this recent court decision starting a couple of years ago, are now behind this hybrid in which they do away with spending limits entirely. And legal, I don't know what league is on this, but they do away with spending limits entirely. They start with a flat grant, and then they let candidates raise small contributions with a match. And then when the public money has reached a certain maximum figure, they let the candidates go on again with small contributions. And that takes care of a lot of the issues among the public financing programs. The bigger issue, of course, you have to face is that a lot of people out there don't like public financing programs at all, and certainly a lot of incumbents don't like
Karen Sharp with Citizen Action of New York, and it's great to listen to both of you. We've been obsessed for the past decade or so with trying to get public funding at the state level in New York State, and really been working hard to do that. Up until 2008, we were really fighting hard for a flat grant system. Larry used to call it jihadists for a clean election system. In 2008, we really shifted our focus to more of a hybrid system because of really the practical reality of trying to get something passed in New York. So I want to just make a couple comments about a hybrid approach. One is on the flat grant, whether it's a flat grant system only or a hybrid system, we think that the threshold issues, it's got to be a lot of very small contributions. The $5,500 contributions really doesn't accomplish the goals in a lot of ways of the flat grant system, which is that you've got to have lots of small donors. And if it's lots of small donors, and Maine and Arizona, it's $5, so it's like really small donors. Connecticut, it's $100 and below. So it does give you the candidate and the campaign the incentive to get to lots of people and get them involved very early on in the campaign, and it builds that kind of grassroots base of volunteers that's necessary for the kinds of participation that we're looking for, and for also providing an alternative base to large donors. So I think the flat grant system, we support for a lot of the reasons that Jerry said, but we think it's important to have that be a very small donor amount with many, many people having to contribute, and that kind of gets you the participation. The hybrid system does get around the court decision, which is really important on the trigger. Interestingly, New York City has a similar kind of trigger as the Maine, Arizona, and Connecticut systems. It hasn't been challenged yet, so hopefully it won't be, but it's even though it's a matching system, it's also got that trigger. If someone's running against you and outspending, you get extra money for the obvious reasons of why that's necessary. The assembly bill that Michael talked about that we worked on in 2008, where we kind of went to the let's do a hybrid approach because we can't get New York State to go with a flat grant approach because people are used to New York City basically. And basically, as we talked to legislators, what we heard over and over again is we had mixed feelings about the New York City system, but we understand it. And they just didn't want to go with a flat grant system because they didn't understand it. I still think it's better, but just trying to get something done is more important than the perfect system at this point. So we started talking about a hybrid system, and the assembly bill that passed in 08 and 09 is actually kind of flips what the federal folks are doing. It starts with matching, and then it adds grants later on to keep you competitive with outspending non-participating candidates. It still has the trigger, so to deal with this court issue, it might have to change how it does that. But I think that the federal approach, and some of what Connecticut's looking at now, where you start with flat grants, you get people in, and then you add matching to keep them being able to spend more as they're being opposed by non-participating candidates, is actually the best approach. But this assembly approach is sort of an interesting twist on it, where you start with matching, which is a lot more familiar to New York legislators, and then you add the grants in some way later on to keep candidates competitive with the self-financed millionaires who are running against them. I also just want to add that I think this party piece is really critical, because part of what's good about any of the public funding systems is this idea of people participating in an active grassroots way, and parties help make that happen. I think parties are a really important way to do that, and I do think public funding for parties, for small donors, would really encourage parties, which have also shifted completely over to very wealthy donors, to shift back toward a small donor base. And I think that parties being able to coordinate with candidates, it just makes sense. It's ridiculous if they can't. With the New York City system, it really just undermines the whole idea of having a political party, and I don't think it builds our political system from either issue point of view or participation point of view to make it so that every individual candidate is an individual. There needs to be some kind of system where people are working as part of a community, and parties are the way that we do that.
You want to comment on that, or we'll go to Tom Gaze?
Thank you, Tom Gaze, Rockefeller Institute, and thanks for both of you for coming in. Wonderful talk. One thing I wonder about is, and I don't want to sound naive about this, but the value or the importance of money in future elections. Of course, it's always been going up, and Jerry is right that a lot of the money does go to broadcast television. But in the next couple of decades at least, I think we are already seeing big changes in the world of broadcast television and reaching voters. I don't know all the things that are going to be developing, but it's quite possible that we're not going to have much in the way of traditional broadcast television. A lot of things are going to be going to the internet. Now, I don't know whether, I've not been following this issue for some years about what candidates are able to spend their money on, or whether there's strategies that they're able to use that draw on the internet or cheaper cable television, more focused efforts at reaching individuals. But I do think that one of the important things, especially, Jerry, if you're going to segregate a certain amount of money for broadcast TV, that we should think forward about the way in which campaigns are actually going to be conducted in the future, given the shifting technology of that we're seeing in the entertainment field, in the broadcast field more generally. I don't know whether you have thoughts or know of interesting campaigns in this last election or other things that have developed that have been, truly different in the way in which people have been reaching voters. But I'd be interested in your thoughts on what the importance of money and broadcast expenditures are likely to be in the, I would guess, at least in the next 10, 15, 20 years. I mean, if we are able to pass any law, it's going to take a few years anyway, so we really have to think well into the future.
Well, I think you raise an excellent point. And, it's hard to think prospectively. It's hard for me to think prospectively about technological changes. I suppose if I could, I would be Bill Gates. I'm not sure how things are going to change, but I can tell you that if you look at the crop of candidates who ran this year, each one of them, or I shouldn't say probably each one of them, but certainly most of them, attempted to use the internet in creative ways. Attempted even to use, I'm talking about New York State candidates. And they attempted to use it through email blasts, through YouTube, through a variety of ways. But they still relied on the old standby of broadcast, not even cable, although there was some cable, commercials. So even though we know there's something going on, we as candidates know there's something going on, and we want to make use of it, and it's cheaper, and we think we can reach more people, we're not so sure. And so we candidates will continue to rely on broadcast commercial. And I'm not certain, I haven't done an exhaustive analysis of this across the country, but the little analysis that I have done in the major states, I think it's true in the major states as well as here in New York, what I've observed.
Tom's question goes to the heart of a very, very big issue. First, I think I mentioned that once upon a time we looked at broadcast policies. This time, when we got a group of people around to do a common study, the four of us, Tony Corrado, Tom Mann, Norm Marstein, and I, Norm had been the author of a broadcast report for the FCC about how to get candidates broadcast time. We just realized that this is sort of whistling back at the wind that's already passed. It's when we talk to people who really do this business, they made the same point too. Can I tell you what's going to be in 5 years? No. I can tell you that in 2 years, a lot of it will be handheld. That was a few years ago. They were right on that. We already know that an awful lot of what people see is driven by the viewer or the user rather than by the station. That's terribly important. Big implications for democracy. There's a very good book by Marcus Pryor that I sometimes assign to my students, that other times recommend. I have one grad student in the room who's heard me give this pitch before. Pryor was talking about cable, and what Pryor had to say goes in spades to anything that's on the internet. When people are driven, when people have the opportunity to choose most normal human beings do not choose to watch politics. They have other lives and they choose entertainment. You can talk all you want about what's going on in Fox and MSNBC. They're watching Law and Order reruns, or American Idol, or dancing, or whatever. The big problem is about getting people to care about anything. So the mechanisms you have to, that I think are democracy that you have to worry about is giving the candidates ways and encouraging them to reach out and to get people in. And these kinds of regulatory approaches about you got to do this much on this mechanism that's not going to be around anyway, I don't see it. By the way, in this last election, 100% of the Senate candidates and pretty close to 100% of the House general election candidates were on Facebook. That is, they had not merely the standard two-dimensional, well, one-dimensional is the old billboard sites. The two-dimensional, and I'm stealing this from Anthony Roosevelt. The two-dimensional is you can write to them and someone on the staff will write you back. And this new three-dimensional, what they call 3D, is the social networking peer-to-peer. A fairly significant number were using peer-to-peer. They were using these networks to try to raise funds. They had an enormous impact. The ones who used it effectively on doing small donor fundraising. You can now do a Barack Obama style of my Barack Obama interactive website is being made available to state legislative candidates by the Democratic State Legislative Committee once the election's over. And we can see how well this did for Democratic State Legislative candidates. But anyway, it was made available for $200. You know, you used to have you needed 50,000 to get one of these things going. But they're being subsidized by the parties, and they're costing practically nothing. So the technology is in fact driving the difficulties of reaching out much lower. It's much easier, but the incentives have to be there.
Well, I think we will have that as our closing comment, unless you have something very quick.
This is small, very quick questions. Yeah, my name is Caesar, Assistant to Senator Felix Ortiz. I have a question for Michael. We saw that your system of Part 1 matching fund does make a big difference to the small donor. However, it costs the state a lot of money. Let's say we roll the rate up to 2-to-1 matching. Would that make a difference at all, or is that not effective?
The answer is we don't have experimental data. We have New York City had 1-to-1 for a while, and that did not have the effect. 4-to-1 did, 6-to-1 was even more. $34 million, with all due respect, I think is a relatively cheap cost for making democracy work.
And if I just may add to that last point, again, thank you for having me here. And I think I'll echo what Karen Scharf was saying. Any kind of improvement, any kind of reform that is ultimately agreed upon by the legislature, whichever, however it looks, will be an improvement. And so my goal was and continues to be to try to provoke some rigorous thinking and activism on attempting to reform the system. And even if a proposal that I have some disagreements with passes, I will be thrilled that we have something in place that is an improvement upon what is really a deplorable system in New York State now, and I think everybody in the room would agree with that. So I hope we moved the ball a little further here today in trying to formulate our ideas in order to get something done for the new legislature come January 1.
Michael, Jerry, thank you very much.